It's increasingly difficult to discern fact from fiction in today's world when analyzing media coverage of the Arab-Israeli conflict. The world media delivers report after report slanted against the state of Israel. That's why Honest Reporting Canada is proud to offer free insider briefing webinars.
Reporters become activists, they're actively destroying the profession.
Anti-Zionism is not limited to the state of Israel. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
Nelson Mandela wrote that you are not born with hate. Somebody is teaching you to hate.
Watch and listen as we speak with world-renowned experts and today's thought leaders so we can help give you the tools and knowledge you need to fight media bias against Israel. Tonight, we are pleased to welcome Ambassador David Friedman as he tells us the inside story of the Abraham Accords and how peace was forged in the Middle East. Please welcome our Executive Director, Mike Fagelman.
Good evening. My name is Mike Fagelman, and I'm the Executive Director of Honest Reporting Canada, a nonprofit organization that fights media bias against Israel and combats anti-Semitism. Thank you all for joining us for tonight's important insider briefing with Ambassador David Friedman. It wasn't too long ago that Israel was assailed by the media as an international pariah, isolated from the rest of the world and doomed to obscurity. Things are certainly different now. The Abraham Accords helped open the door for relations between Israel and two Gulf Arab states, Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates. But it continued as Israel developed formal diplomatic relations with more Muslim-majority countries, including Morocco, Sudan, Chad, and Kosovo. Even Saudi Arabia recently softened its long-time public hostility to Israel, though full-blown relations are likely a long way off. That this shift has taken place is not in doubt. The question that we must ask is what caused this major change to take place, and what does the future hold for the Jewish state and for its role in the Middle East and beyond? Today, Ambassador Friedman, who was an instrumental player in orchestrating the Abraham Accords, joins us to offer the remarkable behind-the-scenes true story of how the Middle East has changed so much in so few years. And now, I have the great pleasure and honor of introducing you to HRC's co-founder and chairman, Mr. Jonas Prince.
Thank you, Mike, and welcome, David. By way of very brief introduction, let me just say in 4 short but tumultuous years, from essentially 2017 to 2020, as U.S. Ambassador to Israel, you, together with a very small group of others, recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital and moved the embassy there, originated and implemented the Abraham Accords, and recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. Then you wrote a book about it, Sledgehammer. It's well worn and studied by me. So I was thinking, if I were the president of the United States, telling my headhunter, find me a great guy to be a diplomat, even an ambassador, the word sledgehammer wouldn't be in the job description. Tell me how that gets reconciled.
Well, look, it probably isn't in the job description if you're looking to hire somebody in the Middle East. I mean, the Middle East is just different. And when we think about diplomacy, generally, we tend to think about gentility and ambiguity and polite discourse. And those values are, I'm not demeaning those values, they have their role, but in the Middle East, there really is a much different focus, and there's a respect with regard to strength and bluntness and the confidence. And so if you were hiring somebody for my job, I would be looking for somebody who was kind of brutally honest, somebody who could see through the fog of diplomatic nuance and who could kind of get quickly to what people need, what people want, and what people have the capacity to deliver, and to do that with brutal clarity. So, I'm probably not the right guy for 185 nations in the world, but I think I was the right guy for Israel.
Well, let me ask you this: how you get to this position is a pretty amazing. Some people might say fortuitous. Others might say it's haskacha, Jewish divine ordinance. and you talk about that. But the qualities and the characteristics, you're a graduate lawyer who specialized in insolvency law and joined a very prominent firm in 1994. I happened to see that the logo of that firm, I don't know if it was a logo when you joined it, says, and I love this, aggressive. It says creative, aggressive, and relentless. Is that another way of saying sledgehammer?
It is. It is. It's, you know, I didn't change when I left the practice of law to become a diplomat. Again, it's not right for every circumstance. It was probably the right approach here. I think, you know, I think the facts bear that out.
The facts bear it out. There is no doubt. However, it was certainly not obvious to the media when you were nominated by that about to be President Trump. I think he had selected you and you had asked for this job. But just before that, how did this come about? How do you, as Trump's insolvency lawyer that had accomplished great results for him, and he's probably on your speed dial and he's probably on yours, vice versa, and maybe still today, I don't know, we'll see. But how does that, where did this interest, you come from, your father's a conservative rabbi, your mother's a high school teacher, you grew up in his world, but what are the qualifications in your mind that says, Mr. Trump, I'd like to be your ambassador to Israel?
I think that there's a core level of competency in the subject matter. You know, I think you need to really know the history of Israel, understand its challenges and its dimensions and its people. You know, being fluent in Hebrew helps, not critical, but helps. Certainly it helped me. I think you know, it's awfully important to have the confidence of the president. And, you know, I think that, you know, people tend to think of an ambassador as simply a guy or a woman who sits in an office and waits for the phone to ring, receiving instructions from headquarters about what messages to deliver. And in the absence of that, they're kind of making parties to kind of keep relationships warm. That's not unlike most ambassador roles. I had a very different discussion with the president and a very different agenda. The president really gave me the file, if you will, the U.S.-Israel file to manage. It's not what ambassadors typically do. Typically, as I said, we're on the receiving end of instructions. And all of that is because we had this, you know, 20-year relationship in which I think he trusted me to a great deal. Now, having said that, you know, we're very different people and have very different values, have very different approaches to life. But you know, when it comes to Trump, he's a very good gauge of talent and ability, and I think he had a general desire to repair the U.S.-Israel relationship. Remember, he's coming in on the heels of a UN resolution that the United States permitted to pass, UN 2334, which literally determined the Western Wall, of all places, to be illegally occupied territory. And we tried very hard to head that off, even before we got into government, and failed. And so he saw the relationship being in need of repair. He saw in me someone who knew the subject matter very well and was absolutely committed to the U.S.-Israel relationship, and somebody who could deliver on a pro-Israel agenda that he wanted to develop. I don't know that he was, when he came into office, fully fully engaged or fully in his own mind determined exactly what that meant, you know, to have a pro-Israel agenda and how to repair what had happened under the Obama years. But he wanted to fix it, and he thought that I could help him get there. And of course, you know, throughout the course of the 4 years, and as I lay out in the book, lots of discussions about how to really make that relationship something that would help both Israel and the United States.
Clearly, the president had faith in you, although I think 5 former ambassadors write a letter of complaint. You're a front page story in the New York Times for several days after the nomination. You have a 5-hour contested hearing. I think the hearing itself has protesters, maybe a guy blowing a shofar, all sorts of crazy things going on in your hearing. And by a slim vote, you get appointed. And at that moment time, do you have self-doubt? Do you think, well, maybe I'm biting off? Is this more chutzpah than experience? Is it self-determination? And the president's backing you, and you've got a great track record with them. But how specific is do you go in thinking, here's what I'm going to do, here are the things I'm going to do, or I'm going to get in there and then figure it out? How does that work?
No, I had an agenda from the first day, and look, all of the noise, I quickly chalked up to politics. Look, Israel, unfortunately, and I wish it weren't the case, but Israel, unfortunately, in American politics, has become one of the third rail issues, and it shouldn't be. But on the left, you've got a very serious anti-Israel coalition of legislators who really believe that Israel is an apartheid state, which is a horrendous mischaracterization of Israel. And they have a political base. And my experience was that when it comes to politics, there are not a lot of profiles in courage, and a lot of people that opposed me, I think, were just fearful of antagonizing that far left base. So I just chalked it up to, this is how the game is played. I came out of that process more determined than ever to pursue the agenda. I thought that this was a unique time in American history and in Israeli history, where we had the leaders of both countries moving in a very important direction on the issues that I cared about. And I just made a list of things we had to do. Obviously, the first one, because I referred to it in the press release that announced my nomination, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. But there was a lot more, from the Golan to Judea and Samaria to trade and anti-boycott legislation. I mean, all kinds of things that were important to me. I want to get as much done as I could, on the assumption, I hoped I was wrong, but under the assumption that it would be a 4-year opportunity, because you never know what's going to be. And so we pushed as many things as we could into those 4 years, and I'm glad we did, because that's all we had.
And we'll get to the specifics of those, but one of the biggest obstacles throughout the 4 years is your own State Department.
Yeah.
And it becomes clear that if you needed a sledgehammer, that was the first place you needed a sledgehammer. Is there, even, let me cut to President Biden, who is a supporter of Israel, but seems to surround himself with people who aren't so friendly to Israel. But come back to the State Department for a moment. Is there a systemic disposition against Israel in the State Department? Is that an overstatement?
I don't think it's an overstatement. I think it is the kind of permanent, conventional positions of the careerists generally. Yeah, and it's a very big place, so we're doing some generalization here, but I think that that's generally true. Look, it was true in the 1940s. I came into my Foreign Relations Committee hearing expecting someone to accuse me of labeling the State Department anti-Semitic in the 1940s. And the only piece of paper I brought with me into that hearing was a letter from Henry Morgenthau to Roosevelt saying, the State Department literally interfered with the military's desire to bomb the tracks of Auschwitz. And he put this right in front of Roosevelt and said, by 1944, there were, we all knew what was going on. There was not a scintilla of doubt that the Nazis were exterminating Jews, and they were moving lots of Jews out of Hungary to Auschwitz. And, you bomb a couple of tracks that are right in the flight patterns of American fighter planes, and you can slow down that mass killing. And it didn't happen. And I think that was maybe the worst of the State Department. But look, they weren't prepared to recognize the state of Israel. They lobbied Truman against it. And, there is most of the people that work on the Mideast file, because the Mideast, after all, is 22 Arab countries and one Jewish state, right? So if you're a specialist in the Mideast, there's a good chance you're an Arabist. And that's basically the composition of the US State Department. The good news, the really good news, that all of that can get overcome by a strong president. I mean, Truman did it in 1948 when Marshall, was pushing against the recognition of Israel. And Trump did it in, in 2017 through 2020. The president wins those fights.
I want to get the Abraham Accords, but I think as a prelude, and I want to get to the movie and the embassy, but I think before getting to the Abraham Accords, I see that as really an outcome of the vision for peace, the attempt to establish peace, finally make peace, not the Israeli-Arab conflict, but the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which is a much more apt descriptor in today's world, largely thanks to what you've done with the Abraham Accords. Let me play this clip. John Kerry in 2016 famously announces what is State Department policy, or so-called conventional wisdom, which you really prove is neither a convention nor wisdom. Can we roll that clip, a few seconds of John Kerry?
There will be no advance and separate peace with the Arab world without the Palestinian process and Palestinian peace. No, 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 and no.
You prove him soundly to be incorrect, but you try. Can you explain, how did you see attempting to make peace with the Palestinians?
So what we thought, and we debated for years whether to ever release this plan. We didn't release it until January of 2020. We probably had a draft of this going back to early 2018. And what we concluded, because we worked on it, and we actually thought at the beginning, early on, before we moved the embassy, that there might be some movement. We had heard lots of different things that gave cause for optimism that proved not to be accurate. I concluded relatively early, by the summer of 2017, that there was no chance whatsoever for the Palestinians to make peace, that Abbas would never do it, and that it was not in his interests, which were essentially to maintain an iron fist over the Palestinian finances, make him and his friends rich, and keep himself alive, as long as possible. I didn't think Abbas was ever going to be a partner. But we debated, having said all that, does it make sense to put out a peace plan? And what we did is we said, well, why don't we show, and it's a vision. It's not a plan, it's a vision, the president's vision for peace. What would it look like, according to our thinking? And we wanted to make sure that it was something that Israel could support. So we worked with the Israelis, talked to them a lot. And what we thought was that if we put out a vision that, on the one hand, could provide the Palestinians with greater autonomy, greater prosperity, and greater security, while at the same time, not only preserving Israel's security, but coming up with a construct where the 500,000 Jews who live in Judea and Samaria will be able to keep their homes, have room for growth, and be incorporated into the state of Israel fully, without any of this ambiguity. If we did all that, and Israel agreed to it, was that in and of itself a positive? And we concluded it was, because what we did was we put something out, and we had the government of Israel, a right-wing government of Israel, publicly saying, we're prepared to endorse this plan. Now, what does this plan mean? It means not only is it geographic in nature, it means that Hamas has to disarm. It means that the Palestinian Authority has to become a government that has longevity, that it has a human rights program, a freedom of religion, that it will have financial transparency in its financial dealings. So we set a series of parameters that we thought would be helpful to Israel, and for the future, guidelines that would keep a terrorist Palestinian state from ever forming. And then on top of that, we created a security overlay where Israel would retain an overall security control of the entire region, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. So what did it look like? What it looked like was a U.S. agreement with Israel that, under a series of circumstances, admittedly difficult to achieve by the Palestinians, but under a series of circumstances, Israel was willing to provide additional territory to the Palestinians on a civilian basis, where they could lead their lives, and have greater prosperity. It was coupled with a significant Marshall Plan that would, really make their lives significantly better, and challenge the Palestinians to react. Because we thought that we would learn one of two things. Either we would learn that there were Palestinians out there that really would put the grievances of their past behind them and look towards the future, or it would show that the Palestinian leadership was just absolutely, stuck in the mud, and it was willing to do nothing to curtail their own malign activity or that of Hamas. So we put it out, we put it out at a ceremony. At the ceremony, if you were following it, you would see that you had the ambassadors of the UAE to the United States, the ambassador of Oman to the United States, the ambassador of Bahrain to the United States. They received standing ovations. And when the plan came out and the Palestinians and Abbas took it to the UN and ripped up the map at the Security Council and got very agitated and aggravated, what that did is it was the final piece. There were a lot of pieces leading up to it, but it was the final piece where the moderate Arab nations in the Gulf said, you know what? There's only so far we can go. We can't support the Palestinians more than their own leadership. We can't be more pro-Palestinian than the Palestinians themselves. And that created the opening.
So we'll talk how we walked through that opening, but just before, two things. One, do you think there is a difference between the Palestinian leadership that you referred to, Abbas, who you say is in the 16th year of a 4-year term, and Hamas, who are dedicated and say they will never make peace? Is there a difference between the leadership and I would say the general populace? And I'll use an analogy without getting sidetracked about like Iran, where you have a leadership that is in extreme control, but a general population that is suffering because of that. Is that an analogy, and is that what's going on, or is it the Palestinian rejection from top to bottom of all ages?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, I think you have Palestinians that are forward-thinking, looking to kind of deal with these issues practically, and I think they generally, though, are shouted down by the leadership. Remember, people tend to think of Hamas as the terrorists and the PA as the potential peacemakers. The PA is not a peacemaking organization. It's brutally corrupt. I always, when people push me to say, wouldn't it be great if we could have a Palestinian state? Let's say you get rid of Hamas and you just have just the PA, and there's a PA and there's a state run by the PA. Is that good or bad? And I say to them, well, look, do you want to have a state which murders homosexuals? Do you want to have a state which subjugates women? Do you want to have a state that engages in massive financial corruption? Because you'll get that with the PA. You don't need Hamas for that. You get that with just all by itself. The PA can deliver on that. So I tend not to get too deep into comparing the PA to Hamas, because it gets you to a dangerous place. Because Hamas is so bad, sometimes you think, well, okay, well then our partners are in the PA because they're not quite as bad. Well, maybe they're not quite as bad, but they're really bad. So I tend not to distinguish.
So from the Palestinian perspective, is this peace plan, and is any peace plan, DOA, is it dead on arrival? Is there any real engagement and argument saying if you did these 5 things, we would be there, or is it just no?
Look, the Palestinian leadership at this point, from my view, is never, the current leadership, they will never give up Jerusalem. And when I say Jerusalem, I'm talking about, not just the far outskirts of Jerusalem beyond the border fence, which I think even Israel is willing to talk about. But I'm talking about, basically half of the city. If you go down, Road 1, which, on the right you have, Sheikh Jarrah, on the left you have Ramat Eshkol. They want, one side of that, and that has a 0% chance of being agreeable to the Israeli public. They want an influx of Palestinian refugees back into Israel. That has, I think, about a 0 chance of being accepted by the Israeli government, right wing or left wing. So the issues are not bridgeable right now. What I think is achievable is sort of what we did, which is providing the Palestinian people under a civilian leadership with the maximum amount of civilian autonomy and prosperity that does not threaten the state of Israel, under an umbrella in which the state of Israel has overall security control. That to me is and if I've spoken about this with many Israeli leaders, from Yair Lapid to Benjamin Netanyahu. They all agree, and Benny Gantz, they all agree this is the only plan that the government of Israel can endorse. It's a good plan. It's a good plan for the Palestinians. It won't give them the state that they want, but it will massively improve the quality of their lives and their prosperity. So, that's sort of where I think we can thread the needle. But none of I mean, what they want is not only not it's not even in their interest, because what will they be left with? They'll be left with a state, a repressive regime that will continue to subjugate its own people. But Israel's not going to agree to it.
Let's go back to that door, as you call it, that opens up when UAE and Bahrain are there watching this rejection, and talk about the geopolitical background that is there to assist in opening this door.
So, the one country that doesn't get enough credit for the Abraham Accords is actually Israel. We tend to think of this as an American initiative, and that we brought these countries to Israel. It's true, but the reason we were able to bring these countries to Israel was in part because of what Israel has become. And if you're Iran or Bahrain or even if you're not in the Persian Gulf, and you look at Israel and you say, these are the people who have figured out how to protect themselves in this very dangerous world. They have a first world economy. They have a first world military. They're the strongest nation in the Middle East. They have the support and loyalty of the United States. They have the respect of Russia. They actually have the respect even of countries of Iran and China. I mean, they are a very well respected country for what they've achieved. Why wouldn't we want to be, with them, in at least in matters of common interest? And it was always, the Palestinians that were, as John Kerry said, well, you can't do it because of the Palestinians. What Israel began to do, and what we began to do, is to kind of convince these countries that the Palestinians, they're an issue in the Middle East, but they're not the only issue. And as the Palestinians became an issue, as opposed to John Kerry's view that they were the gating issue, things began to open up. And those conversations took place not just with us in the Gulf countries, but the Mossad would have conversations, and Netanyahu would have conversations, and there was a lot of common ground that we found.
To make sure we're all on the same level of understanding, what are the Abraham Accords, with what countries, and why? Who cares? What do they do?
So the Abraham Accords are normalization agreements, I think is the best way to speak about them. You can call them peace agreements too. I mean, the Arab League was in a state of war with Israel, other than Egypt and Jordan, which made peace in the 70s and the 90s. But the other 20 countries in the Arab League were in a state of war. So you can call it a peace agreement because 2 or 3 countries or 4 countries in the Arab League were then pulled out. You can also call it normalization if you are of the view that, well, these countries never, shot at each other, so let's just call it normalization. Either way, it doesn't matter. It was a reciprocal agreement between Israel and beginning with UAE, then Bahrain, then Sudan, and then Morocco, and then moving up into Europe and Kosovo. Muslim nations that agreed to normalize with Israel. Normalization means you exchange diplomats, you open up embassies in the respective countries, you have trade relations, you have educational exchanges, you have exchange students. The whole panoply of things that make nations friendly with each other. The big one, was UAE, because UAE is really a major player, in the Gulf and really in the world. I mean, a major wealthy country, an advanced country, a leader in the Arab world. I mean, probably second only to Saudi Arabia, with a very forward-thinking leader in Mohammed bin Zayed. So that went first. But then, different countries fell into line, and they all fell into line for different reasons. I'm happy to, kind of share them with you if we're up to that point. But I have a prior point first.
I think it's interesting. It was interesting to me to read the appendix where you have them, and I hadn't appreciated that with each of these 4 Arab countries, and we'll leave Kosovo out for a moment, that's the 5th country, as you say, this is a trilateral relationship. In other words, it's an agreement between, in all cases, Israel, the US, and each of the 4 countries. and they each get something different. They each asked for something different. And the ask was really from the United States, as I saw it. It was the US that was saying, I know you need this. If you do this, then we want you to normalize relations here. And in weighing it out, they all said, yes, that's net a good thing for us.
Yeah.
But what got them to the door was Israel saying, we're not going to extend sovereignty into the West Bank, Judeo-Samaria, for a period of time. Have I got that right so far?
You have it right with the UAE. I mean, the UAE went first, and they were the ones that said, "Look, you gotta somehow postpone in Judea and Samaria for us to move forward." And I think, as you know, there've been a bunch of books out now, whether it was mine or Jared's or Greenblatt's, or I mean, you know, there've been a few books. That was that was maybe the only point of internal dissent on our side about how to do that and whether to do it and to what extent to do it. At the end of the day, I think our side collectively, and I was slower to get to this point, our side collectively thought that we should be postponing sovereignty in total until, in order to achieve this. I was of the view that we could have moved forward, not fully, but partially, and still gotten to the same place. It doesn't matter now. It's an academic issue.
Well, maybe not quite so academic. In one book called The Divider, there's a statement that there is a secret letter in a vault in the UAE in Washington that says delaying sovereignty means 3 years.
Yeah. I haven't seen the letter, but I believe that's true. And I'll tell you why, because the idea was, the expectations at that point were that Trump would win again. And so Israel wanted to take another run at sovereignty while Trump was still president. So that was the expectation.
Not everybody keeps the location of these countries top of mind. So let's just show a slide as to the geography, because I do want to get into the geopolitics here. So we see on this map, first of all, I point out where the location of Iran is, because in a way, this is in effect a NATO alliance against Iran, the way NATO is an alliance against Russia. In a way, that's a fair analogy. And so we have the UAE, Iran, which is too tiny to even show with a color. Egypt and Jordan are there because they have existing treaties. Sudan joins in, and Morocco, that's pretty far and always has had relatively good relationships, I think, with Israel. Much further to the west. But the elephant in the river, the big missing piece is Saudi. And Saudi is worthy of a few minutes discussion. It's been said that none of this would have happened without Saudi tacit approval. Is that fair?
I think so. I think there are others that are closer to the Saudis than me, but I think it's fair. I mean, here's the evidence. The evidence is, number one, Bahrain never would have done this without Saudi, at least tacit approval. I mean, they've got very, very important close relations with Saudi. They depend on Saudi, that relationship, for their own prosperity. So I think that's clear. The second thing is just the airspace point. As we started flying planes from Ben Gurion Airport to Abu Dhabi or Dubai or to Manama, it's an extra 3 hours if you can't fly over Saudi airspace. None of us wanted to sit on a plane an extra 3 hours, and the Saudis let these planes go. And if they were hostile to these accords, why in the world would they let us use their airspace? So yeah, and I'll tell you the truth. I believe that if we got a second term, the Saudis would be on board by now. I'm firmly of that view. And look, Biden took a different approach. He took a much more hostile approach with the Saudis. The Saudis have responded in kind. I mean, the relationship between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia now is maybe at its lowest point in a decade. So that's going to require now some repair with another administration. But we were close.
Let's unpack the Saudi relationship a little bit more. But before, I just wanted to point out, if we go back to that map for a minute, I'm told there's 20 flights a day between Tel Aviv and Dubai, that you go to Dubai and order off the kosher menu, that there's I've seen photos of bar mitzvahs taking place. This is a warm peace. Netanyahu had talked about the peace with Egypt and Jordan in a book he wrote many years ago. It's a cold peace. This is a warm peace.
It's a warm peace. Yeah, it's a warm peace. It's peace for peace, which is also important, right? No land swaps are involved. It's peace for peace. And I've told this to the president. I mean, when I speak to the president, the thing that probably gets the most of a rise out of him is when I tell him that I have an easier time getting a kosher sandwich in Abu Dhabi than I do in Washington, D.C. And it's true. And, you know, when the Abraham Accords were announced, the Minister of Tourism of the Emirates, the first thing he did was he gave a directive to all the hotels in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and said, you have to have at least kosher room service. You know, we're not going to make you change your restaurants, but room service, you got to have kosher food. So yeah, it's a very warm peace.
Now, in fairness, there was Bahrain and the UAE and Morocco and Sudan have never been at war with Israel. So as you say, there was never that dimension to overcome.
So, but it's true with regard. It's true, and it's a fair point. But when it comes to Sudan, Sudan was a major thoroughfare for arms trafficking, you know, through Egypt into Sinai. So getting Sudan to come around and get off the terror watch list was very important for Israel. And Sudan, I think Sudan, you can be fairly said, was engaged in military conflict with Israel, not directly, but certainly through their willingness to allow, you know, terrorists to use their territory. Not the case with regard to the other countries. You're correct.
And you mentioned Saudi. Let's turn to Saudi because they are the big player in the Middle East. That it would be, they are not part of an Abraham Accord. The U.S. relationship has been kind of a yo-yo from Obama to Trump that had a warm relationship. And then Biden, who calls Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, a pariah, yet then turns up cap in hand, as it were, saying, please help me on oil prices by increasing supply. And then when he goes back empty-handed, says we have to impose sanctions or deal with the Saudis. So this is in the way that the U.S. having something to offer the other Arab countries in the Abraham Accords, is there anything left for the Americans to offer Saudi to encourage them to join in the Abraham Accords?
Well, not right now. I mean, Biden has mishandled this and been entirely hypocritical, right? Because if MBS is a pariah because you don't like the way you don't like his morals and his ethics, if you think you want to make him a pariah, then you shouldn't be going there hat in hand asking for money. You should be turning on your own energy resources if you need energy. So he goes there, you know, and what's the message he's sending? You know, you're a pariah, but, you know, if you can help me out before the midterms, you know, I'm willing to kind of look the other way. Of course, that was going to fail. I mean, that was a hopelessly jarbled and incoherent and frankly hypocritical message. So, look, things are you'll need a new administration in the White House. I'm not even saying Democrat or Republican, or you could probably guess what I think. But you need a new administration in the White House to get Saudi Arabia back on track. And I'll tell you the truth, they're not perfect. And I think, and I'm not in the business of defending them, but at the same time, they are a very important country, and they have huge impact over the Islamic world, and they are making reforms. And so, you know, when you have a country like that wants to make reforms, and you think they're moving in the right direction, maybe not at the pace that you'd like, but they're moving in the right direction, I think the worst thing you can do is to convince them that they made a mistake and get them moving the other way, which I think is where we are now.
Not slightly off topic, but tied into this, Jared has been accused of being close with the Saudis. They did make a $2 billion investment in his private equity fund after this. Optics aren't good, whatever that means. Do you have a point of view on that?
Well, look, I think Jared established while in government very good relations with Saudi Arabia, really, really excellent. And I think America was strengthened by those relationships. I don't know anything about the circumstances of Jared's business deals, but I would be shocked if that investment by Saudi Arabia was in any way tied to his conduct in office. I mean, I think he's got a good relationship with the Saudis, and the Saudis have a lot of money, and they're probably have a lot of confidence in Jared. So I don't have it. I mean, I don't suspect wrongdoing. I mean, people will make of it what they do.
Just asking because we have a private equity fund here in Toronto, and let
How you
me.
doing?
It's doing okay. Let me ask about 2 years later. So we have with hindsight on the countries involved. We've got a chart here. Things are only positive, mostly in the UAE, but we've got a small chart here that shows things are up, trade is up. So this is working with these 4 countries. I don't have Kosovo stats here, but trade is up, engagement is up. In fact, yesterday, I saw Israel and Bahrain sign really a historic agreement about agriculture in a conference being hosted by Israel to work together. So this really is working in a warm economic way to everybody's benefit, the way it's supposed to work out. Would you agree?
I completely agree. I think we could do more. I mean, we could always do more, and we could always advance this more. I mean, the one kind of wet blanket on all of this is the fact that we're chasing Iran right now, and that has these countries nervous because they're not really sure where American policy lies. Look, what did the most damage over the last 10 years or 15 years to American credibility among these countries was what America did to Mubarak at the first sign of trouble during the Arab Spring in Cairo. And they just let this guy Mubarak, again, I'm not defending him or praising him. He was the leader of Egypt for many years, and he did accomplish some important things. He was an important ally of the United States. And at the first sign of trouble within his own, population, Obama just let him twist in the wind. And so we came in and we're trying to establish credibility with these countries, let them know that we're here for them, and to help them achieve the geopolitical and national security goals that they and we want to achieve. And then, it's like you said, like a yo-yo. So then Obama comes in, so then, Biden comes in, maybe the same thing. Biden comes in and brings in the same crowd of people that Obama hired, to deal with Iran. And we start chasing Iran, potentially throwing trillions of dollars at them, which will only serve to embolden them and cause them to engage in additional malign activity. So these countries are confused by the metronome that exists in American politics, and I think that's really why we haven't achieved full potential, because they're wondering, and we're not even standing up for these brave women who are risking their lives and giving their lives every day to make Iran a safer place, and we're still not giving up on this crazy fantasy about Iran becoming peaceful. So the Gulf countries know Iran better than America does. Israel knows Iran better than America does. They all agree what we ought to do, and we're just kind of adrift on that issue. So it's a limiting factor on how much these accords can continue to expand.
Iran, Ray, what you raise about Iran, and I don't like to deal in hypotheticals, but if the sacrifices these young kids and the women are making with their they're voting with their lives, and it's terrible. Should they succeed, hopefully they'll succeed. Does that remove part of the glue that's holding these accords together? In other words, once that common enemy is gone, is that actually destabilizing for the accords?
No, I think that would be something welcomed by everybody, and it would just be, I think it would be incremental. I think it would get everybody focusing. Everybody would start playing offense rather than defense in terms of making these agreements more robust and more profitable. So No, I mean, again, Iran was a factor in the Accords, more so in the UAE than with others. I don't think it was a major factor with Morocco at all. I don't think it was a major factor with Sudan, Bahrain. I'm not really sure, I couldn't quantify it, but that's just one factor. I mean, there's so much positive here that I think could be exploited in the absence of a malign threat from Iran. I actually think it goes further and faster in the right direction.
Let me ask you about, I don't know if this builds on the Abraham Accords or it's independent, but in the last few days, Lebanon and Israel, based on US brokerage again, have announced an agreement to deal with 2 offshore gas sites surrounding a border issue as to where a line is drawn, separating 2 oil fields called Karish, which there is proven deposits on the Israeli side of that line. And we won't get into details of where that line is. We have a slide, but it's pretty detailed. And the Kana site where there may be oil. Now, Lebanon is, to oversimplify it, let's say through Hezbollah, a proxy for Iran. So there's this interesting dynamic that I'm hope you can explain because I'm scratching my head about it. Here is a deal where now you've got election time. It's election November 1st, so it's election season, whatever that may mean. Nonetheless, Lapid government is saying we will make a deal and recommend a deal to be signed that recognizes this line that gives the Lebanese offshore rights to exploit oil, gas reserves should they find them. They're not found yet. And we will continue to develop with a large company, Total, a French company, to exploit revenue for ourselves. The details are unexplained as far as I can tell. You have said, this is a great deal. We get 0, they get 100%. Netanyahu has said that, although I don't know if that's totally fair because the details have not been explained. And as I understand it, what I've read, there is to be some revenue sharing, royalty sharing of the Lebanese revenue, should there be some, on a basis to be determined. That's not a good premise for any lawyer to see. So, and the fact that Hezbollah is not opposing this means they must think it's in Lebanese, Iran interest to do this. So can you help unpack what is going on in that deal?
Well, it's a little bit complicated, but I'll give it to you for your listeners. Again, this is my view. I mean, my view is not shared by Lapid. It's not shared by Amos Hochstein or by Joe Biden. But I think it's a very dangerous deal, and here's why. When we were working on this during our time in office, we had the same issues. It was all about this Kana field, and Lebanon agreed with Israel to about a 60-40 split, 60% to Lebanon, 40% to Israel. Israel was willing to give a little bit more because Israel had Karish, they had Tamar, they had Leviathan, and they wanted Lebanon they wanted to help the Lebanese economy. It's in Israel's interest to do that. So Israel agreed to slightly more than half going to Lebanon, even though the claims were roughly 50-50. Lebanon agreed. It never got done. Why didn't it get done? Because the Hezbollah proxies in the Lebanese government said, no, we won't agree to it. So fast forward to now, and there's a deal. What changed? What changed is that Israel went from 60-40 to 100-0. And at 100-0, Lebanon, Hezbollah says, okay, we can now declare victory that we got this extra 40% for Lebanon. The 17% that the Israelis are talking about is I won't go into it. I think it's kind of funny. I think it's more interesting. I don't think it's real. So we're really talking, I think we're talking about, certainly everybody agrees territorially, forgetting about the royalty stuff, territorially, it's 100% to Lebanon and 0% to Israel. And the incremental 40% from when we were in office is all attributable to the efforts and the demands of Hezbollah. Now, the whole point of making this deal with Lebanon was to weaken Hezbollah and to strengthen the independent government of Lebanon. This doesn't do it because Hezbollah is taking credit for the incremental value. They're telling the Lebanese people, we got you extra money. That's sort of number one. Number two, what's Israel getting out of it? Well, we're not really sure because they're not getting any territorial value. But if the argument is that Israel is going to have quiet when they drill in Karish, right, which everybody agrees is Israeli territory. If Israel's getting quiet there, then what are they doing? Are they paying protection money to Hezbollah to, not to have Hezbollah shoot Iranian drones? Well, I mean, then what's Israel going to have to pay next year when Hezbollah makes another demand? I mean, I'm not a big fan of asking Israel to pay protection money to terrorists. So that's symbolically and maybe more a very bad practice. The last thing is that Lebanon and Israel are not signing any agreements with each other. They're continuing to be in a state of war. Lebanon is agreeing with America to do certain things, and Israel is agreeing with America that they'll do certain things. Israel has no rights against Lebanon. America is guaranteeing Israel's ability to enforce its claims against Lebanon. But what does that guarantee? America is not clear at all what that guarantee means. And, we've seen in the past, whether it was the Bush letter to Ariel Sharon or, more recently, we're seeing the Budapest memorandum, that was supposed to protect Ukraine. That certainly isn't being honored. So I'm just not sure at all what America's role here is. And I'd hate to think that, what it seems to me, both, you said it's election season in both countries, right? And I would hate to see that this is just America pushing, Lapid and Gantz into a deal so that Lapid can declare victory when he really shouldn't, and Biden can declare victory and show that he's able to create, offshore energy deposits that are not on American soil, so he keeps his green people happy. It doesn't, it's the timing is bad, and the numbers don't make a lot of sense, and the optics to me are frightening. So, I mean, I hope I said it simply why I think it's a bad deal.
Thank you. We'll see what happens with that, but I need to turn to this week's news cycle and partly election season, and the big topic, and you write about this, and you write about it in your book, is anti-Semitism. The issue, well, let me start. A few days ago, Trump lashes out at American Jews for not being more appreciative of his administration's work in Israel. And he says, and I'll just read a bit of this: "No president has done more for Israel than I have," Trump says on his own media, Truth Social. "Somewhat surprisingly, however, our wonderful evangelicals," this is Trump speaking, "are far more appreciative of this than the people of the Jewish faith, especially those living in the US. Those living in Israel, though, are a different story. Highest approval rating in the world. Could easily be PM. US Jews have to get their act together and appreciate what they have in Israel before it is too late." That's his quote.
Yep.
That's been, let me ask you, in your view, is that anti-Semitic?
No, I think it's inartful. I mean, it's not the way I wouldn't talk like that, but no, it's not anti-Semitic.
Bibi, by the way, yesterday, when asked the same question on MSNBC, says that it's not it's the frustration of a politician, although those words have been condemned by a couple of Jewish organizations, JDL, etc. But I want to tie this in with Kanye West. I'm going to call him Kanye West. He's legally changed his name to Ye. I don't mean to be impolite to him, but let's just call him Kanye so we all know who we're talking about here. He comes out, and I'm not going to repeat the horrible things he says on Tucker Carlson and elsewhere because I don't want to give it any airtime, but he comes out, which I think you would agree everybody says are anti-Semitic. And when he says, let's go DEFCON 4, Bill Mayer in an interview with Bibi says, are you going to declare a state of war on Kanye and bomb him, or what are you going to do? So there's truth in humor. But the point I want to get to is Trump, when asked about Kanye's comments, ducks. He says Kanye has always been a friend of me, Trump. Sometimes people don't understand him. And so he doesn't condemn Kanye. Should he have condemned Kanye? would you advise him? I think in your book, during Charlottesville, you say to Trump, you say one of the few times he doesn't listen to you, and you're not happy about that. Did you call Trump and say, that's not right? Do you still speak to Trump?
I guess I do, but it's been a while. I mean, it's probably been since the last time I've spoken to him was in person, the first half of 22. So it's been a while. It's been several months since I've spoken to him. Look, let me say a couple of things. Number one, just to be clear, I condemn fully, unequivocally what Kanye said. I mean, that's number one. Number two, I'm not a psychologist. I think Kanye is having a mental episode. And I think he's, you know, what I saw, some pundit said they got him on their show coming out later today, where he's going to recant all this stuff. But I think when Kanye was talking, it was clearly the rantings of a very unstable mind, and I'm not sure whether Trump didn't condemn him for that reason or not. So I just don't know what Trump was thinking, and maybe, you know, maybe in his mind, by going soft on him, he'd get him to come around. I just don't know. I haven't been involved. The first tweet that Trump came out with, again, I told you I don't speak that way, but you know, is it when he says no president's done more for Israel? You know, again, it's a debatable point, but I think he's got a good argument on that. Do American Jews support him relative to the evangelicals? The answer is we know the answer. It's no. American Jews generally don't support Trump. Do Israelis support Trump? I think the answer generally is yes. Now, this whole thing about before it's too late, I don't know what he was talking about. But if the idea is that American Jews need to support candidates that support Israel to avoid things like arming Iran with a nuclear weapon, I agree with him. Again, you know, he speaks in very staccato, you know, points on social media, and I haven't talked with him, but I think that Israel is absolutely essential to the survival of American Jewry. I think without in Israel, there's no American Jewry. Physically, spiritually, theologically, I just don't think it works. And so American Jews should care about Israel. Do they care enough? I mean, look, I've been working this issue for a long time. No, I don't think they do. But I don't think what Trump said was wrong or inappropriate, and I do agree that it reflects his frustration. I would love to see American Jews. I'd love to see North American Jews. I'm not looking to give Canada a pass here, you know, or diaspora Jews generally. I like to see greater support for Israel and a recognition that, you know, don't hold Israel to standards that no other country is keeping. It's not helpful and it's not fair. So that's it. I mean, look, and one last point, Jonas, you know, look, anti-Semitism is a big issue, but it doesn't do well. It never does well when it gets mixed up with politics. It really should be an apolitical issue. And you see it almost all the energy, all the people jumping in to talk about anti-Semitism, they jump in with much greater energy when there's a political component. If you'll notice, I'm not shy about tweeting. I haven't said a word about Trump or a word about Kanye, because I think it's really, you know, I think Netanyahu said it best. It's kind of, you know, I mean, in Hebrew, I would say it's, you know, shtuyot, you know, in English, it's kind of nonsense. I mean, the safety of American Jews or Jews around the world is not going to be affected very much either way by what Kanye says or by what Trump says. I mean, I know people disagree with me, but I think there's real anti-Semitism out there that we ought to be trying to tackle. And the more we get sidetracked by these celebrity comments, I think we lose focus.
But as a former president, someone who may want to be president again, if former President Trump were sitting across from your desk today, would you counsel him as you did in Charlottesville? We have a Charlottetown here, so I get Charlotte. Would you counsel him to say, Don, buddy, you must condemn this in no uncertain terms, because the ambiguity, which is how you defined what a diplomat was, polite ambiguity, it is harming things. There's not enough clarity. And you're also, by the way, there's a political side to this too, which is there's a lot of key votes where the Jewish vote may be important, and you're feeding your opponents bullets to fire at you because you're not clear. Wouldn't you be clear about this to him?
Sure, but sure, of course. I mean, it should be condemned unambiguously. But what I would suggest, Jonas, go back, read what Trump said post, at Charlottesville. Everybody quotes him with that line about there being very fine people on both sides. Okay, go 2 sentences after that, and he said, of course, I'm not speaking about the white supremacists who should be condemned entirely. Okay, now nobody bothers to report that part because it's not in keeping with the Trump anti-Semitic narrative. Also, at a time when you have a moment or others have a moment, go back and read some of his speeches on Holocaust Remembrance Day. He's given some extraordinary speeches. In fact, I went to Auschwitz and I repeated. I remember there when I was at Auschwitz in Birkenau, I repeated something that he had just said about 2 months earlier, which he said, anyone who thinks that they will destroy the Jewish people, we will destroy them first. Now that's Trump. That's what he said. So, it's a mixed bag. The one thing about Trump, and I think hopefully people will understand this when they compare him to Biden, because it's a perfect contrast. Trump never stops talking. He every time he walks out from the White House to Marine One, he stops, and no one can stop. No one can control what he says. He's unscripted, and he'll talk and he'll talk and he'll talk. And sometimes he'll say some really, some really unfortunate things that we all wish he hadn't said. And sometimes he'll say some things that are absolutely brilliant. He'll just talk, and nobody can control it. Now, Biden, they don't give him more than 5 minutes a week in front of a camera. They don't let him do anything which is unscripted. They don't, so, what does Biden really think? Who knows? I mean, with Trump, everything you see is what you get. That's who he is. And he ain't perfect. But I do say, if you went into a coma, God forbid, on January 21st, 2017, and you woke up on January 21st, 2021, and you just asked, you asked some basic questions about what kind of shape the world was in and what happened, you would likely say that whoever was running America did a pretty good job. And I think that's the standard by which he should be judged. I mean, he is not like any other politician. He's completely unscripted, and he does make mistakes. But he's also, people should give him credit for the good things he's done as well.
David, let me turn away from Donald Trump to David Friedman. Here's what a reviewer in The Guardian said about your book. David Friedman is far from finished. Sledgehammer is not just a memoir. It is a well-written audition for 2024 and beyond. You have started the Friedman Center for Peace Through Strength, Jerusalem-based Foundation for Peace. Political ambitions, if Trump were to win and calls up and says, David, come back. Is that in the cards?
Well, look, there is no chance that I will run for elect office. I mean, that there's no chance, and I'm happy to, anybody thought there was, happy to clear that up. But if I can serve America in a way that I can continue to build upon the things that we did before and strengthen the U.S.-Israel relationship, I'd be honored to do it. We got a lot done in the first term. I really wish we had a second term. We have to work together with our friends in Israel to really figure out and help Israel figure out. It's not our decision, it's Israel's decision and Israel's decision alone to figure out really what is their eastern border. I think they have to decide that. They have to start executing on that strategy. And I think once it's clear, what belongs to Israel, what's being held, doesn't mean they have to give anything away. They can continue to hold other territory, for a potential peace deal in the future. But once they begin to kind of set aside, this is our land, this land is essential to our security. This land was given to us by God. This land is where the Bible took place, whatever the arguments are. But I think that it will be good for Israel to do that. It'll make it a stronger country, and it will make it clear that, that those living in Israel are all given, equal rights. And those that are not living in Israel are subject to a different structure. But that I think is important. And we left that on the table. We couldn't get to it. As you pointed out, we suspended the sovereignty for some number of years, and I had hoped that that suspension would have been over and I would still be in office, but I'm not. And so that's certainly on my bucket list, and with God's help, I'll have a chance to continue to work on it.
Let me leave with it. This hour has flown by. We haven't untouched the move of the embassy, Golan Heights, the Hansel Treaty, Judea area. We've left more uncovered than we've covered. But I'll say, and we haven't talked about the media, but the New York Times, who I think it's fair to say is no friend of yours, when you left said, and I'll read you what they said: love him or hate him, and most people fall into one camp or the other, David Friedman will complete his tour of duty in Israel this month, having etched his name in history as one of America's most influential envoys. I don't know about those that hate you. I don't think many of those in this crowd, but you've done an incredible job. Continued success wherever that road takes you. David Hamelech, we didn't have a chance to talk about the appropriate name for you, and free man in Yiddish and German. We didn't even talk about, we stayed away from Kabbalistic themes in this talk today. But I want to thank you very much. Continued success, and I'm sure we'll be seeing more of you.
Well, thank you for a great conversation. And I agree, we left a lot of things, it did fly by. We left a lot of things to be discussed, and let's hopefully discuss them on a future, maybe even in person.
I would love that. Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much to all our viewers. We hope you stay tuned for our next talk. I don't know when or with whom, but we will let you know.